I think what we're seeing right now is that the future of work, the future of society is being reshaped on this timescale of years, not decades anymore. Everything is changing much faster, which has both opportunities and risks. Opportunities because we don't have the sort of baked in rigid social norms about how AI is supposed to be used. We have a lot of freedom here, but it comes with risks because sometimes that means that we'll change things and have no real idea what the impacts of those changes will be. And by the time we figure it out, it's too late.
Hi, I'm Boaz, founder and CEO of Augmented AI, and I'm excited that you're tuning in to the Shift AI podcast, a show that explores what it takes to thrive and adapt to the changing workplace in the digital age of remote work and AI. In today's episode, I'm thrilled to have David Danks and Zhou Li as our guests. David is a professor of data science and philosophy at the University of California, San Diego, and is an expert in the ethical, psychological, and policy issues around AI. Zhou is the founder and CEO of HydroX AI and is a leading pioneer in AI security. If you're someone interested in managing the risks and security associated with adoption of AI, you're not going to want to miss this episode. We also want to send out a special thank you to Augmented AI for sponsoring this episode. This is going to be a great show, and we are super excited to have David and Zhou today. And we can't wait to learn more from them. Let's get to it. Zhou, David, thank you for being on the Shift AI podcast. I really am excited to talk with you guys today.
Pleasure to be here, Boaz. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, same here.
So I usually like to start, I'm just going to read back your resumes. And when I'm done, you guys can check me and make sure I got everything right. So Zhou, you have a really interesting software background. I mean, you interned at Microsoft a long time ago, but you spent many years at pretty big companies dealing with security. You were senior software engineer at LinkedIn, engineering manager at Facebook, the head of privacy and data protection at ByteDance, and now you're the founder and CEO of HydroX AI. And did I get all of that right?
Yeah, very
Did I miss anything along the way?
No, it just make me feel like intern a long time back. I'm pretty old right now.
And David, you are, and I want to make sure I get this right, but you're the professor of data science and philosophy at the University of California at San Diego. And you're also the L.L. Thurston Professor of Philosophy and Psychology at Carnegie Mellon University. You were for many, many years. I also saw too that you had a Carnegie Fellowship in 2017, and you were the James S. McConnell Foundation Scholar Award in 2008. And you've been thinking a lot about data science for a long time. I know there's probably lots and lots of other things that you've been involved in, but did I get the big parts right?
Absolutely, yeah. And don't worry about it. If you're feeling old, I'm feeling really old when I think about how long I've been doing some of these things.
Today's going to be a talk around security and AI adoption. But before we go there, this show is also about the future of work, and work is changing for so many people. Can you, Zhou, first of all, tell us the first time that you did a job where someone actually gave you a paycheck? What was the first time?
Yeah. So actually you mentioned that I was interning at Microsoft. So actually I was paid. But if we're talking about a full-time job, actually my first job was in a startup called AirWatch. And luckily it was acquired in 2 years by VMware. And I graduated from Clemson University, and that's the first time I got a job actually in the US. And my first job was a software engineer. Actually, I was working on security side of the software engineering. I was building authentication, authorization, Kerberos, and that's where I first time working on security in the real world and got my first paycheck.
That's good. The first startup you ever were part of got acquired in 2 years. Yeah. That's pretty amazing. How about you, David? What was your first real job?
Mine's a little bit more prosaic. I suppose the first job I had was mowing lawns in Northeast Ohio when I was 12 years old. Mowing my neighbors' lawns, and they would give me a little bit of cash. The first job that led to a paycheck, though, would have been in college, actually doing work at my university. I was at Princeton as an undergrad, and it was doing statistics for the sports teams. So I would go to all the sporting events and sit there and track the statistics and then hand them off to somebody to write a press release. So it meant I got paid to go to sporting events, which is kind of a fun thing to get to do as a freshman in college.
That is fun. That would be a fun first job. I love that. Well, let's stay in the kind of collegiate space for a while, because I know that you've been doing research for a long time. Will you set the stage for us, David, and talk a little bit about the way you've been thinking about data security, privacy, and now, like, I know you think a lot about ethics and AI, but can you just talk about like a little bit of background that kind of what led you to the point that you are now?
Sure. So my background very much was in cognitive science and what we would now call AI. It wasn't, people didn't use that term back around 2000 in the late 90s because it was viewed as bragging a bit to talk about things in terms of AI. But it really was started there. And I came into the ethics and policy space much more by thinking about the fact that the technologies that we were all building were starting to have real impacts on the world. The technologies that were being built in 1996 weren't really reshaping people's lives. But by the time we're getting to 2010, it's become quite clear to me and many others, I was a latecomer in some ways to these issues, that the technologies we were building were going to start to have a transformative impact. And so for the last 14 to 15 years, a lot of what I've been working on is this question of how do we have AI that actually benefits, if not everybody, at least a large number of people. And part of that, a big part of that, goes to questions of how do we trust the technologies that we're building? How do we ensure the technologies are safe? The philosopher in me constantly is asking, what does trust and safety even mean in this domain? What is it to trust an autonomous vehicle that's driving on the streets next to my daughter when she was walking to school in 7th grade, which is what was happening in Pittsburgh at the time? When you learn that your financial services company is using AI to help manage your portfolio, and that's your retirement ahead of you. Well, what does it mean for that to be safe, for your money to be taken care of in ways that matter to you? And so throughout all of this work, and I think this is something that is pretty widely viewed now, has been an emphasis on the importance of values, our human values, our societal values, our community values, because that's what leads to trust. Trust is when systems protect our values. That's what safety is about. I don't care if that self-driving car is, half a centimeter to the left as it's driving, that's still perfectly safe. I don't even actually care if it drives really slowly or really fast. That can still be safe. I do care if it goes up on the sidewalk where a pedestrian is. Obviously, that's unsafe. And that's because certain things matter and other things don't. And that's really what values are at their heart. And so this is what sort of pulls together ethics and policy and the technical side of AI safety, AI trust, AI responsibility, is really thinking carefully about what is it that matters to us individually and collectively. How can that be protected or supported through technology, through by satisfaction of technical constraints? And how can we, through policy, regulatory, other kinds of governance mechanisms, help ensure that technology actually meets the constraints that are important from the perspective of our values?
Yeah, and I know that you're very selective about the companies that you work with and help with these kind of issues. And so how did you come to become part of Hydro and get involved in what Draw is doing?
Well, so there was an outreach. I got an email from Frau and Victor, the chief of staff at HydroX, basically asking, would I be willing to chat with them? And I am a firm believer that we as academics have a professional, societal, even moral responsibility to give back to the rest of the world. We are incredibly privileged to get to spend our lives thinking about cutting edge problems. And I think that we as professors do, in general, have an obligation to try and transmit that knowledge, to share that knowledge outside of the confines of the university. So I sometimes say, and Charles heard me say this before, I'll take a meeting with anybody. I won't necessarily take a second meeting with anybody. And I was deeply impressed when I talked with them that they were prioritizing not just sort of safety as a technical matter, even though HydroX is developing some really sophisticated technical tools, but they were trying to find ways to operationalize, to make tangible human values, to make tangible these notions of safety, and doing it in an environment where there's a lot of uncertainty right now, uncertainty about the technology, uncertainty about regulation. We don't have international standards for AI safety, for example. And so it seemed to me that they as a company were really, they had the right instincts about where to go. And so it seemed to me that it would be really potentially valuable that I could perhaps give some insights into where the field needed to go, how to think about some of these kinds of problems of making AI safety real, And then, I haven't seriously coded in about 15 years and you don't want me to code. So hand that off to other people.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Well, let's go a little bit deeper into HydroX. But before we do, one of the things that was really impressive when we first talked, Rao, is that your experience at some of these larger companies and dealing with data and security at these companies really kind of set the stage for the way that you think about HydroX. Can you talk a little bit about that and about some of the things that you saw that impacted you along the way, especially, your role at ByteDance, but also at LinkedIn and otherwise?
Yes, definitely. So I've been working in the security space for around 15 years, from a startup to a mature company to a big tech, so all sorts of. And what I learned, there are so many things I learned from those companies, for sure. And I would say that most of those companies, they are doing a great job. They have invested into the people, resources, time, everything to trying to achieve higher in terms of more secure and safer place for their products. However, I also realized one thing, that attacking sometimes is at a much or not much is kind of like an easier position where people need to do everything to defend you. But if you found the one security hole, you're successful. So from that point of view, actually all the companies, especially the big techs, they're at a not super ideal position where they need to do a lot, but sometimes even they tried everything, they don't even have the exhaustive list. They still have somewhat a vulnerability or vulnerable hole. So of course, within the companies, we did everything that we can do, trying to cover most of the obvious issues, as well as something that we can do as the advanced topics. But we also leverage a bunch of the vendors from outside, trying to make the whole puzzle or the whole vulnerability list more complete. So when I was working with those companies, that's one important thing which I learned that very much impact me to found this company. At the very beginning, when I was using GPT-2 and 3, it was amazing. But when I was looking around, there was no company working on AI safety and security, or there's no mature solutions for this space. And of course, when I was looking at big ones, those big names, probably I shouldn't mention them, that they do have internal red teaming or security teams to do something. But when I was doing some attackings, I found out every single model, every single company, every single service, we do have a non-zero attack success rate, which means there was vulnerability somewhere. So based on which I found out, okay, probably this is a great opportunity. Of course, they're doing their job the great ways, but there must be some things they cannot cover 100%. That's where I, as a security person, where I can do a lot of things to make those things more complete. And those companies, they will gain benefit or value from it to make sure that their products are safer and more secure. From my side, we can contribute to this to make the adoption and even the acceleration of the generative AI. So I think that's the angle I was looking at this space from what I learned from those companies and my past experiences.
Well, let's talk about adoption a little bit, because I know that that's one of the things that needs to happen in order for security to even matter. And so What are you seeing out there? Can you talk a little bit about the landscape, the AI landscape, what you're seeing with Gen AI adoption, and how that's playing out?
Right. So my personal opinion, because this is a very big topic, I could be wrong, or I could be like incomplete. So I used to use the metaphor of the Industrial Revolution. So I think everyone knows that from the very, very beginning of it until it's more mature and a lot of people can benefit from it, it took dozens of years or even longer. And I think the generative AI as a hot topic is only like a little bit more than 1 year. So adoption rate is still relatively low. Yeah. So there are so many aspects that people are working: base models, infrastructures, platform, verticals, applications, machines, GPUs, so on and so forth. And we can easily tell that at the very beginning, base models are very hot. At the very beginning, it was OpenAI, and then Anthropic, Gemini, Llama, open source models, closed models. People are jumping into this space. After a period of time, probably we barely see a new base model builders coming out. But instead of that situation, more and more companies are leveraging the existing base models to work on ML ops, infrastructures, some platforms. And also a lot of companies, they are working on specific domains, healthcare, banking, financial, insurance, education, so on and so forth. That's where things are not mature yet, but are growing really fast. So from my point of view, at this moment, adoption is still at a very, very, very early stage. But people are trying to see what values they can gain from it. Those are the reasons people are trying to use it.
Yeah.
They get value, they get better growth, revenue, or higher productivities. But to be honest, I think some areas, they have a much better motivation and results already. But some areas, they are still exploring. So from my point of view, we are working mostly with the areas where they have better adoptions. That's where they have a strong needs to have a better AI safety and security in place. But for the rest, I think they're still growing. So probably at some point that they will start to think more about AI safety and security. But relatively, they're still at a stage.
Before we go further with the interview, I want to take a moment to tell you about one of our podcast sponsors, Augmented AI, and how they are transforming businesses with Gen AI solutions. Augmented AI specializes in helping organizations uncover and address internal workflow challenges that Gen AI can solve. Their comprehensive process starts by identifying and prioritizing business problems, and then assessing each based on value, effort, and risk. Once a problem is selected, the Augmented AI team tests and validates the solution to ensure that it works. Only after this thorough validation do they draft technical requirements, which serve as a blueprint for building and deploying the solutions. The real beauty of partnering with Augmented AI is that they don't just stop at strategy and feasibility studies. They actually stand up the solutions and manage them for you so you can focus on what you do best. If you're interested in experiencing this innovative approach to deploying Gen AI solutions, visit simplyaugmented.ai and click on the Learn More button. That's simplyaugmented.ai. Now back to the episode. It's interesting to think about this point in time, because one of the things that we benefit from in these early days is we can rethink the way that we build security into the system, into the process. And David, I know you've spoken about this before, about kind of the typical cybersecurity play where you kind of tack it on at the end. It's a patch, it's a fix. But now we have this opportunity to kind of do it the right way. Can you talk a little bit about the way that you think about that and you think about those kind of frameworks?
Yeah, I think, there have been various studies, especially back in the 80s and 90s, looking at the cost of changing a software product, depending on when in the design, develop, deploy life cycle of the software product, you figure out you need to change something. And the estimates are often that it's on the order of 30 times cheaper to fix something in design than it is in deployment. That's sort of massively cheaper if you fix things in design. And it also tends to be massively more effective. So the question is, how do we, as you said, have notions of safety, responsibility, and trust at the forefront in design, rather than showing up in deployment where we suddenly realize, oh, we need to do something about this. We need to slap on some ad hoc guardrail that just says, well, if it has this curse word, don't output it, right? Which is clearly never going to be satisfactory. And here, I think, although we talk about things like AI safety and security, which suggests an analog to cybersecurity, I think a better analogy for us to have in mind, a better exemplar to have in mind, is the changes that we've seen over the last 25 to 30 years around user interfaces and user experience. I am old enough to remember the days when interfaces were designed by people like me writing the code. And we were just like, well, this will make sense to me, so of course it'll make sense to everybody. And when people figured out, and it became just dogma within the UX community, that you are not your user, right? Don't assume that you know what people want. I think the same thing is true here. The people building generative AI systems, the people building the next generation of AI systems, for the most part, they're not going to be the end users all the time. And they need to recognize that they don't always know what their users are going to want. They don't know what safety means and what trust means and what security means for the people who are going to be interacting with these systems. So I think it's absolutely critical that we adopt not the cybersecurity paradigm of the last 30 years, but the UX paradigm from the last 30 years. People thinking about user values, thinking about user safety, need to be in the room when design is happening. They need to be there contributing to the ways that we think about what it is that the technology needs to do to be successful in the first place. Simply answering queries or the LSAT, the law school admissions test, that shouldn't be the standard for success of a generative AI system. Success should be measured by whether it helps people do their jobs or to express themselves creatively or any of the other amazing things that these technologies are able to help people do.
Yeah, I like that. I like that approach. It's a very persona first approach, thinking
Absolutely.
about how the persona right out of the gate. Well, let's go back a little bit and talk about some of the security risks. So I want you to make this real for us. A lot of people underestimate the risks associated with AI and with cyber in general. So can you just talk and illustrate for us, like, what are the potential security problems that could occur, and why should we be worried?
So first of all, there are so many different attacking methods. And of course, I want to separate this. Attacking method and content which can apply the attacking method against. So for example, when we're talking about attacking method, the purpose is only one: bypass the guardrails. So there must be some protections in place. I want to bypass it through jailbreak, through prompt injection, through a bunch of different technologies. And after we bypass the guardrails, people normally want to cause some damage. That's where we call the categories or content. For example, hallucination, misinformation, hate speech, inappropriate content, bad images, so on and so forth. So currently, we are capable of applying almost all the known attacking methods to any models of the world, open source, closed models. And after we bypass the guardrails, basically you are capable of doing things that you want to do, but by default is disallowed. So for example, if I don't want to name a model, let's assume there's a model A. So let's assume we want to generate a children inappropriate content. And normally you just write a prompt. And if the model is behaving correctly, the model will tell you, hey, sorry, I cannot fulfill your request. This is inappropriate, evaluate the content policy or whatever. But basically it will refuse to give you the picture. But if you can bypass the guardrails, let's assume you're asking to generate a picture of a child, which is bad. And normally we will bypass. There are so many techniques. I think probably I won't give the details of how to bypass that in case people just going to replicate that offline. But basically we can conduct an attack which can bypass the guardrails. Then the model will not say, hey, I cannot generate this for you. And eventually they will give you a picture which is inappropriate. So that's one of the examples. But also I want to give another examples. The first example I gave was something that will violate the policies, make people feel bad and kind of inappropriate for both adults and children. But also in the business world, this will also cause the potential loss. So for example, for e-commerce, for example, for different business where they're running something online. For example, there's an e-commerce product where people can ask a question saying, hey, I want to get the most popular shoes within the area that I live, among my age, so on and so forth. So normally it will give you a recommendation based on a bunch of the data. And the recommendation is going to be, okay, this is the most popular shoes that you can purchase, and give you the link and give you the picture, give you the price. But if we have the data poisoning, the model will be poisoned, and which means you will get a wrong link information back where you're going to be tricked, and you may lose money to buy a wrong shoes or you pay the wrong price, something like that.
And now, before we dive deeper, I want to take a quick moment and tell you a little bit about one of our podcast partners. As a listener of this show, I know you're trying to stay on top of all things AI and tech, which is why you have to check out the amazing GeekWire podcast, produced by GeekWire and hosted by Todd Bishop. It's a treasure of insights featuring industry leaders and the latest tech trends that are shaping our world, and the perfect companion podcast to Shift AI. GeekWire podcast is where technology meets curiosity and covers the world of technology, startups, and geek culture. Expand your tech horizons and join the conversation. Tune into the GeekWire podcast today, a perfect complement to our own discussions here. Don't miss out. Follow the GeekWire podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or your favorite listening app. Now back to the episode. I like the string of data conversations. So David, I know that you think a lot about about data in your work. Can you, when you discuss it in courses and in your research, how do you think about data and how do you think about it moving forward? We recently had some data breaches last week. It's July 16th today. And so there was a big data breach with a big telco that happened last week. And, it's on people's minds right now. How are you thinking about this as we move forward in the future? I mean, I can't imagine that it's going to get better. It's probably going to be more difficult to lock down and keep all this stuff private. So can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I mean, I think, one of the things that we've learned with regards to data and privacy is really two things. One is once the data are recorded, you should expect that they're going to get out eventually. There are people who have real interest in breaking into data lakes, data oceans, whatever data warehouse storage you have. And so once the data are recorded, you just have to assume if it's sitting somewhere, it's going to get out eventually, I think, for most cases. And so what that really points to is the importance of using, whether it's techniques like digital differential privacy, or what we refer to as data minimalism, the idea that you shouldn't record and store data that you don't know why you need it, right? So a lot of times companies will just store it and figure, well, we'll figure it out later. And instead, data minimalism says, no, you can always go back and get data if you figure out what the use would be later. Don't store it if you don't need it. So that's the first point, is that unfortunately, I think we've moved to a world where we just have to assume that data that is being stored is going to be leaked out. The other thing, though, that I think that we've learned over the last 20 years is in most cases, this isn't universal, of course, but in most cases, it's not actually the data that we worry about. It's how the data can be used. Can it be used to steal my identity? Can it be used to make me pay more for my insurance because my health data leaked to my insurer? Could it be used to deny me a job because something came out in my private social media that then made its way out into the broader world, and so my employer was able to see it, or my potential employer?
Yeah.
So I think the other thing that we've realized is that a focus solely on the data is not enough. We also need to think about how those data get used. And so we're used to, I think, 10 years ago, people would talk about the data and the algorithm as though these were these separate things. And we could control or govern one or the other, or maybe even both, but they were kind of independent of each other. And one of the things that's really changed, I think, in the last 3 to 5 years with the ways that AI systems have developed is that increasingly we've got algorithms that are tuned to particular kinds of data that are collected for particular algorithmic purposes, such that we're really seeing a merging of the two. And I think now we shouldn't think of data as numbers in a file somewhere on some giant server. We should be thinking about data as, to use an older metaphor, data as the oil, as the gasoline that powers the actions and decisions of an AI system. And that, I think, is empowering for us as individuals, because now we have a whole new way of trying to protect ourselves and increase our own safety and security, which is worrying less about, did somebody write down a number about me somewhere? And instead worrying about, how do we help constrain, whether through governments, through social pressures, through naming and shaming, whatever it may be, how do we constrain the ways that companies are using the data that in ways that might undermine us or harm us?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So I'm going to ask this question to the both of you, but I'm going to start with you, David. I mean, you are advising HydroX. You also advise others. You're a mentor to students. Who mentored you throughout your career and who impacted you along the way?
Well, a lot of people did, as one might guess. I guess I want to call out specifically 2 people. One was my PhD advisor, Professor Clark Gleamore, who really was the first person I'd met who could just seamlessly move between math, in his case, physics, philosophy, society. He sort of was, he's still alive, but, was very much the first exemplar of somebody who you would think of as a polymath, somebody who just kind of knew everything and could connect the pieces together. And as you might guess from the way I've been talking, that's been really inspirational for me, to not feel bound that I'm only allowed to think about one kind of question. I'm only allowed to use one kind of tool. I'm very lucky to be in a position where I, seamlessly move between helping to write policy recommendations to actually doing data science and building AI systems, primarily with biomedical data, to philosophical and ethical analyses of what it is that we as a society might want. And that's really because of the exemplar that in many ways Clark provided to me.
Yeah.
The other person that I would call out is somebody who just recently passed away. And I only met him once, but nonetheless had a huge impact on me. And that was the philosopher Daniel Dennett, who was at Tufts University and for many years wrote a number of books that really reached out to the public and helped them to understand philosophy, because that was somebody who saw a way to take the position of a professor and start to really impact the world, not just sit back in our proverbial ivory tower and write journal articles that only other professors read, but really to engage with the world on its terms, to say, what is it that's going on out in the world? How do we shape things? How do we make a difference? So I know it's not exactly what people usually think about in terms of a mentor, but it was an exemplar of what was possible that really, I think, shaped how much I was willing to get out of my own comfort zone over the last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, I like that. That's great. And Zhou, how about you? I mean, you're operating as an engineer at a super high level, and you understand both the good side and the bad side of security and security breaches. Like, is there a mentor or somebody that you looked up to as you were growing in your career that you want to call out?
Yeah, definitely. I'm not sure if this is a mentor, but he's definitely someone I look up to. I would say Elon Musk, probably as an entrepreneur who is working on a startup. I mean, he's someone I look up to all the time. Two things are important. Number one, work hard. Number two, never give up. So that's something that I see a lot. I never met him in person, but I read his book, watch his videos, so on and so forth. So I think if I can do whatever he did in the past, I can be a successful entrepreneur. So he never mentored me in the real world, but I think a lot of people can learn from his experience or his stories. So I will call him as a mentor.
Yeah,
someone I look up to. Yeah.
Well, the last question I have is the one that I ask everybody on this show. And I want you to kind of wave your magic wands a little bit, look into the future. When you think about the future of work and the future of AI and the future of security, how do you describe that in 2 words? Zhou, I'm going to go with you first and then David next. So 2 words, and then you can elaborate. What would those 2 words be?
So the 2 words I have is productive and safe. So when I'm saying that, I think if generative AI were the new generation of AI will be real, it has to improve their productivity 100 times or even higher. And that's where a lot of the time will be freed up, a lot of the work will be freed up. It doesn't mean that people will lose their jobs. I think that's the wrong impression. I think people will have to do more innovative, just different things that we cannot imagine right now. But also, I think safety and security are something that people always have the concerns around. So if we are about to increase the productivities X times, if we can do that in a safe and a secure manner, that's something we really expect. So 2 words, productive, secure.
How about you, David? What would your 2 words be?
My 2 words would be rapid evolution. I think that, Zhou earlier mentioned, referred back to the Industrial Revolution. And in the Industrial Revolution, it quite simply transformed society in every possible way, but it did it over the span of decades. And I think what we're seeing right now is that the future of work, the future of society is being reshaped on this time scale of years, not decades anymore. And so the rapid part is just everything is changing much faster, which has both opportunities and risks. Opportunities because we don't have the sort of baked in, rigid, social norms about how AI is, quote unquote, supposed to be used. We have a lot of freedom here, but it comes with risks because sometimes that means that we'll change things and have no real idea what the impacts of those changes will be. And by the time we figure it out, it's too late. So the rapid part comes from just the speed that AI seems to be moving at and the way that it's increasingly showing up in our lives in ways that were unexpected. The evolution part actually goes to exactly what Zhou was pointing, which is I am an optimist that I don't think we're going to see massive unemployment because of AI. I think we're going to see massive evolution in the needs and expectations of the workforce. So yes, we're going to see job losses. It's going to happen, but we're also going to see a lot of job change. And so that's why I prefer the term evolution rather than something like replacement. Unfortunately, we don't know what that evolution is going to be. I talk to students and they say, well, I'm going to be a data science major. That means that I'm set for a job for the next 20 years. And then they realize that actually, GPT 4.0 can write Python scripts to do a lot of data science. And they go, uh-oh, does this mean I'm out of a job? And we say, no, you're not out of a job, but your job's going to change. Now you have to actually really understand why you're doing that data analytic, why you're going to look at the data in a particular way. What do you want to achieve with it? Because those are things that generative AI, at least now, doesn't know how to do. So really trying to figure out how are things going to evolve is, I think, a huge challenge that faces all of us.
Yeah. Well, generally, I tend to be an optimist, and I'm really excited about this future, but I appreciate being able to think about it in the way that you two are thinking and talking about it, because I think that the risks are going to increase and we need to be safe and we need to be secure. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time on the show today. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm happy that you guys are on the Shift AI podcast. I'd love to have you back on again.
Definitely.
Anytime. Happy to come back, Boaz. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Such a pleasure to have David and Zhou as our guest on today's episode. David and Zhou are thinking deeply about the ethical concerns related to the proliferation of AI technology and the technical security and safeguards that will protect society. If you want to stay connected to David and Zhou, you can find them on LinkedIn and X. If you're interested in how they think about AI security and ethics, definitely connect with them and keep up with their posts and activities online. I continue to be amazed by the guests we've had on the show, and I'm excited about the ones joining us in the near future. I truly appreciate you spending your time with us. Thank you for listening to this episode, and don't forget to subscribe to the Shift AI podcast for more exciting interviews, and to the Augmented AI Weekly newsletter for updates on how AI can help you scale your business. The Shift AI podcast is syndicated by GeekWire, and we are grateful to have the show sponsored by Augmented AI. Our theme music was created by Dave Angel.